and above all the commitment they've shown to helping get people back into work. Now Barnsley Town Hall is 91 years old, built in 1933, and guess why we built it? It was a job creation scheme to get people into work. A bit of a worry, nearly 100 years later we're still trying to do that, but nonetheless you can't fault us for keeping at it. What we do know in Barnsley, particularly since the mines closed, that we've changed the borough enormously over that time, but one thing has bedevilled us throughout that period and still does, and that is the number of people who are not working. Not on the actively seeking claimant list, but people who are simply excluded from working society, more often than not through no fault of their own. And we know that's not just a Barnsley problem, it's an issue nationwide. And we wanted to try and make sure we could tackle that and not just leave people parked in those conditions for the rest of their lives. So hence the Pathways to Work Commission, hence all the insight and thinking and thought processes have gone through, because we really do believe this isn't just a benefit to Barnsley, this could be spread nationwide and give other people the opportunity to get back into work as part of that process. We couldn't have done this without the South Yorkshire Combined Authority, and I'm pleased to welcome this afternoon the Mayor, Oliver Coppard, and I'll just ask Oliver again to give a few words of welcome. Oliver.
Hi everyone, I'm Oliver, I'm South Yorkshire's Mayor. This building is obviously over 100 years old, and I think this might be the fullest I've ever seen it, at least. And quite rightly so, because we have the brilliant Liz Kendall with us today. I was saying to Liz just a moment ago, I've been in office now for 2 years, and I've had more engagement with government ministers and the government in the last 2 weeks than I have in the last 2 years combined. And that has been a brilliant thing to see, the energy with which the government have come out of the traps. And not just paying a lip service to the idea of devolution, but genuinely engaging with mayors, with local authorities and with local communities, not just to tackle the challenges that communities like South Yorkshire face, but to grasp the opportunities that South Yorkshire offer. And the Pathways to Work Commission, as Steve has already mentioned, under the stewardship of the brilliant Alan Milburn, is a massive opportunity. It is an opportunity to tackle the economic stagnation that we've seen over the last 14 years. It is an opportunity to get people back into work. It is an opportunity to provide people with hope. And most of all, it is an opportunity to begin to restore the pride, the purpose and the prosperity of South Yorkshire. So it has been a brilliant thing to be part of. I look forward to hearing the speech and putting in place some of these recommendations, because it could not come at a better or more important time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, Liz. Thank you, Alan, for all your work and all the commissioners. And I'll hand over to Alan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ollie, and thanks to Steve, but most of all, thanks to Liz for being here. It's wonderful to see you in office, first of all, and hitting the ground running in terms of the reform that I know you want to bring to welfare, employment, support services. And if I may say so, you've come to the right place. So 18 months ago, Steve asked me to lead this commission, and he had the foresight then to realise that this problem of economic inactivity, people who are workless, often for grounds of ill health, was not just a big local problem, it was a big national problem as well. So I'd like to thank him, I'd like to thank Barnsley Council, the team that have been supporting us, particularly Matt Hanna and their team, for all the work that they've done during the course of the work of this commission. The report that you have before you, I think there are copies available, is my responsibility, of course, but it also carries the imprint of my fellow commissioners who are here, some of whom are with us here today. I'm enormously grateful to them for their insights, as I am to all of those who gave evidence and to those residents that we surveyed and polled, the people who are economically inactive. And one of the unique insights about this report is that you can't change things unless you get an insight from the front line itself, the people who are affected. So I hope that the report has their voices embedded within it. In our country today, there are 1 in 5 working age people who are economically inactive. The numbers are rising and they now outnumber the officially unemployed 6 to 1. They also hold the key to raising Britain's level of economic growth, which we know is sluggish. I say that because today, maybe for the first time in our country's history, the biggest constraint that we have in raising levels of economic growth is actually shortage of labour. If you think about it, that is quite a turnaround in just, certainly in my lifetime, probably just in a few decades. This place, Barnsley, used to be the epicentre of mass unemployment, following the closure of the mines. In the 1980s, early 1990s, unemployment was through the roof. Today, unemployment here is lower than the national average. That is quite a turnaround. By contrast, when we started our work here, in fact, I remember Steve and Matt presenting me with one data point, which is that there were 4,000 vacancies in the local economy and barely 4,000 people who were officially unemployed chasing them. Meanwhile, there were 6,000 people who wanted a job, who were economically inactive and told they'd been unable to work. And I guess what our report is about is those 6,000 people. So the report is probably the biggest place-based diagnosis of what economic inactivity is, but the prescriptions really have national significance. The Barnsley story is Britain's story too. Over the 25 years before the pandemic, on average, the labour market was growing by about 1 million people every 4 years. In the last 4 years, it's barely grown at all. Changing demographics and ageing population, people choosing to work less, and restrictions on immigration, which have been fueling the labour market for very many years, mean that that situation is liable to get worse rather than better in the future. And that is why we conclude that doubling down on getting more people out of economic inactivity is the only route to higher levels of economic growth in our country. The societal consequences of not doing so, in terms of lost income, status and belonging for each person affected, are truly catastrophic. But so are the consequences for the welfare bill, which is spiralling out of control. An extra £20 billion over the next 5 years unless we get a grip of that. This is not a sustainable situation. So far, then, so bad. But here's the good news. The research that we undertook for this report, doing polling of people who are out of the workforce, suggests that 7 in 10 of them would take a job that is aligned with their interests, their circumstances, and their skills. If our research findings in Barnsley were then applied nationally, it would suggest there may be over 4 either now or in the future. That, by the way, is 3 million more than the numbers who want a job according to official figures. This is the fuel that the economy needs to achieve higher levels of growth in the future. So, what is needed to make that happen? To start with, economic inactivity needs to be made a public policy priority. It isn't today. We say in this report that a new national strategy, which is cross-government in nature, is needed. We welcome the fact that the new government has set an ambition to raise the employment rate to 80%, but to ensure that labour market expansion is not overly reliant on migration, we also say an additional new target is needed to reduce levels of economic inactivity. The pendulum needs to move towards getting more Brits back to work rather than always assuming labour shortages are best addressed by importing workers from overseas. We then need to understand why people who could be working aren't and what could help them to do so. That's why we did this survey and asked people for their views. Inevitably, there's no simple reason. It's pretty complex. People have caring responsibilities, they have anxiety if they've been out of the labour market, of going back into it. There's a big fear for very many people that if they go back in, the job simply isn't worth it compared to a life on benefit. But the biggest driver, without a single doubt, is ill health. 3 in 4 people of those we surveyed in Barnsley had a health condition. The most dramatic change that we've seen nationally over the course of the last few years is the number of those out of work due to long-term sickness. That trend started well over a decade ago, well before the pandemic. The biggest concern is the increase in mental ill health related issues amongst young people. The country honestly can't afford to have a whole generation of young people consigned to a life devoid of both work and home. But until very recently at least, public policymakers have not approached the issue in that way. They've relied instead on toughening benefit rules to deal with what is largely a health-related problem. They've been pointing public policy ammunition at the wrong target, and unsurprisingly, they've been missing. The consequence is that the welfare and employment system simply misses the target and it applies the wrong solutions to the wrong people. Those who are classified as officially seeking work are offered some support to do so, but also face harsh conditionality, and they have lower benefit payments than those who are classified as unable to work. By contrast, the latter, economically inactive group, they receive higher payments in benefits than the people actively seeking work. They have no conditionality, and frankly, they get precious little support. Of course, there are many people who are in receipt of incapacity benefit because they have a severe disability in order to recognise their lack of earning power. But within the wider cohort of the economically inactive, 7 in 10 people say that they would like a job. Here's the problem. 8 in 10 people who are economically inactive receive some sort of state benefit. Only 1 in 10 of them have regular contact with the employment services that could help them realise their aspirations to work. To address this, what we call a catastrophic systems failure, which is what I think it is, we suggest that work incentives should be strengthened by allowing people to try work without losing benefits, so reducing their anxiety. We suggest the creation of a new personalised support and advice service targeted on those cohorts who most want to work, particularly young people. And we suggest that economically inactive people in receipt of state benefit should have a new duty to engage with employment support services. There's no doubt that the one-stick approach of simply sanctioning benefits hasn't worked. What we need is a better balance between sticks and carrots in the future. That is a long way from where the system is today. In fact, look, it isn't a system. It's a spaghetti soup of a plethora of initiatives and organisations all trying to help people in work. We know that there are 50 national programmes run by 17 public bodies, all trying to do that. In Barnsley, we found 70 services, 70 trying to do the same. So we think there's a big opportunity for streamlining bureaucracy and saving cost. But we also believe that more radical reform is needed. Jobs Centre Plus sees its role as delivering nationally determined targets. It looks upwards to Whitehall, not outwards to local labour markets. Only 1 in 6 employers in our country say they would use Jobs Centre Plus for their recruitment needs. So that's why we call for the system to be denationalised. Mayors, it's all coming your way, should have powers to deal with economic inactivity, drawing on multi-year funding with budget pools from DWP, from skills budgets, from NHS employment support and from other services. And in return, mayors should also have to draw up local plans to help deal with economic inactivity. And here's the rub. To incentivise local services to do that, we say that if you achieve a saving, that should be kept locally rather than being returned nationally, so that we can continue to invest in more local services. Employers have a key role too. In Barnsley, we've found that many are willing to play their part, but overall, our assessment is that not enough is being done to make jobs attractive and wages sufficient to help close the gap with benefits. In the longer term, obviously attracting higher skilled occupations to the area will change that wage profile, and there's a lot of work being undertaken to do so. But in the short term, the current jobs on offer need to provide more security and flexibility to attract those with long-term health conditions back into work. We suggest a national good employer charter should be created to codify best employment practice so that people on benefits can see where the really quality work opportunities exist. Similarly, employers could do more to stem the flow of existing workers out of the workplace into inactivity. The infrastructure to support workplace health in our country is remarkably poor compared to most other developed nations. So we call for occupational health to become a bigger part of the nation's health ecosystem, and we ask government to consider tax incentives to enable employers to invest there. More generally, although rises in economic activity are absolutely related to ill health, the health service and employment services operate like ships that pass in the night. They never connect, and that simply isn't working. So rethink is needed, and that's why we call for NHS integrated care boards to be given a duty of engagement with the local delivery plan for reducing inactivity, local health services to be better integrated with employment support services, and being focused on the major health conditions, mental ill health, cardiovascular disease, for example, that are driving the problem. It's truly lamentable that over the last decade, public policy has been so badly caught on the back foot by the explosion in economic inactivity. The election of a new government provides the opportunity for a radically new approach. But action is needed locally as well as nationally. One of the things that's really struck us in Barnsley and South Yorkshire more generally has been this shared determination in the local community to make change happen. We see that in local authorities, we see it amongst employers, community organisations and the health service. We draw from that local well of commitment to make recommendations in our report to both the Council and the Mayor to take action to address some of the root causes of the inactivity problem, such as educational underachievement and gaps in public transport infrastructure, and I'm completely confident that both Steve and Oliver will take those recommendations forward. It's usually the case that if you produce a report like this, you produce it, one or two people read it, and then it lies gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. It's interesting. In Barnsley and South Yorkshire, they've chosen a different course, and that is to move to action immediately. So we're going to be developing a local pilot in Barnsley for a new form of employment support, which will start next spring. The idea is to help over 2,000 people who are economically active into sustained employment by 2028. That will cost about £11 million over 4 years, but the payback in terms of individual gains to the citizen, the impact on the local economy through more spending power and the reduction in welfare bills is about £70 million per annum. So this is a classic case of investing up front in order to save a lot in the end. We hope, with the support of DWP, by the way, Liz, that there's no such thing as a free lunch, that this will be supported locally and then rolled out nationally and, of course, across South Yorkshire as a whole. There's one final point that I have for you, which is a note of optimism. And this is really testament to the willingness in the local community to embrace change. The top 20 local employers have just committed between them to give jobs to 200 currently economically inactive people. Somebody asked me earlier what I feel about this report. And I said the most important thing is if we find one person a job and it changes their lives, that is honestly good enough for me. If we can get 200, that's great. If we can get 2,000, even better. If we can get the Barnsley 6,000 into work, then the job is done. Change is needed. And with it, a sense of urgency. Britain's low rate of economic growth, our spiralling welfare bills, and our historical reliance on immigration are no longer sustainable. It has to become a national imperative to reduce levels of economic inactivity. I hope the work of this Commission and of this report makes a small contribution to making that happen. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Alan. We knew when we started this process we'd got the right person for the job then. We know it even more now. Thank you for everything you've done. Earlier, Oliver said he's had more engagement with the government in 2 weeks than he has for the last 2 years. Well, that's nothing. We've had more engagement in 1 day than we've had for 40. Which I think tells its own story. So, you'll not be surprised to hear me say it gives me the greatest of pleasure to introduce our new Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Liz Kendall.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, it really is brilliant to be here in Barnsley as you launch your pioneering report on pathways to work. You identify tackling economic inactivity as a critical challenge and opportunity for your town and our country. You call for a national ambition to build a more inclusive economy where people have a right to work and the expectation they'll be helped to do so. You say achieving this will require a radically new approach, not only across government, but by employers, the NHS, mayors, councils, charities, colleges, communities, and by citizens themselves. And I am here today to say loudly and clearly that's precisely what this government will deliver. In our first 2 weeks in government, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, have taken immediate action to get our economy growing again, overhauling the planning system, launching the National Wealth Fund, creating Skills England, and, with the support of my department, unlocking pension investment too. Growth is the #1 priority of this government, because it is the only sustainable way that we will improve people's living standards and rebuild our vital public services. Our plan to get Britain working is central to this goal. DWP is the HR department of the government's growth mission. But in order to realise that, we need fundamental reform. So a department for welfare becomes a genuine department for work, driven by the liberating potential of good work for individuals and by the pursuit of full and fulfilling employment in every corner of our land. But before I say more about our reforms, I want to say something more personal. I have always believed the benefits of work go far beyond a payslip. Having a job and providing for yourself and your family gives millions of people across Britain dignity and self-respect. Work can bring pride, fulfilment, relationships and connections, a sense of purpose, value and control. Good work is good for mental health, and for millions of women, work can bring freedom, equality and independence too. Many of us have to take time away from work, sometimes because we want to, often because we have to study, bring up a family or care for a loved one, or because of ill health or disability. Valuable contributions to our society come in many different shapes and forms. But over the last 14 years, millions of people have been denied the chance and the right to participate in the world of work. They've been excluded, then labelled and blamed for the position they are in. If this is what has happened to you, my message is we hear you, we are on your side, and we will work day and night to put this right. Far from our economy being on an upward trajectory, as the now leader of the opposition claims, employment is down, unemployment is up, and our workforce is shrinking. Britain isn't working in 3 damaging ways. First, we've seen record numbers of people, 2.8 million of our fellow citizens, excluded from the workforce due to long-term sickness. A similar number are actually in work with health problems and at risk of falling out. The last Parliament saw the biggest increase in economic inactivity in 40 years. Many of these hidden unemployed are over 50, struggling with bad hips, knees and joints, something I have experienced myself. The majority are women, often caring for elderly or disabled relatives at the same time. Spiralling economic inactivity is bad for individuals, many of whom want to work, as your report shows. It's bad for employers who are desperate to recruit. And it is bad for our public finances too. The OBR says spending on sickness and disability benefits is set to increase by £30 billion over the forecast period. Imagine what just a fraction of that money could do instead. The second problem we face is that far too many people are stuck in low-paid, poor-quality work. Only 1 in 6 low-paid workers ever fully escapes into better-paid work. Many are in insecure jobs with unpredictable working patterns. The result is too many people are in poverty despite being in work. Too many people lack power and control over their lives, and it leads to stagnant productivity, which is holding our economy back. The third major problem is that after 14 years of the Conservatives, nearly 1 million young people, a staggering 1 in 8, are now not in education, employment or training. That is up 90,000 in the last year alone. Young people struggling with poor mental health and lacking basic qualifications face the greatest disadvantages. Each and every one should have their whole future ahead of them. But under the Tories, they have been written off before their careers have even begun, with all the long-term consequences we know that this brings for their future job prospects and earning potential. Now, these 3 challenges, I feel, are a damning indictment of the last government. They are all far worse in parts of the Midlands and the North, which have borne the brunt of Conservative economic failure, just as they did in the past. And they show the scale of the challenge that this new Labour government must now confront. So why have we ended up here? The causes of the problems we face are complex. In part, they reflect the impact of economic, social and demographic forces affecting our country. But I am convinced that the approach taken by previous Conservative ministers at the DWP has harmed people's capacity to cope and thrive in the face of the challenges and changes we have in future. The fundamental problem is that the current system of DWP, job centres and other employment support is almost entirely designed to address the problems of yesterday, not today, tomorrow and beyond. We must, and we will, do everything to keep unemployment low. The Labour Party was forged from the struggle for jobs and the fight against unemployment. But the most urgent challenges today are different. They're about how we deal with spiralling inactivity, driven by the fact that we are an older, sicker nation. They're about how to ensure all young people get the education, skills and job opportunities they need to kickstart their careers. And they are about how we enable people, whatever their age, to have decent pay and the chance to build a career and to benefit from good work that gives them the chance to thrive. The Tories completely failed to address these challenges. Over the last 14 years, their approach at DWP was focused almost entirely on the benefit system and specifically on implementing universal credit. They turned Job Centre Plus into a benefit monitoring service, not a public employment service, which was its original aim. And they paid nowhere near enough attention to the wider issues like health, skills, childcare, transport, that play such a huge role in determining whether you can get work, stay in work and get on in your work. The result is a system that is both too siloed and too centralised. We fail to properly join up health, work and skills, and we aren't rooted in local economies and driven by local needs. And in terms of improving job quality and promoting good work, the Tories almost entirely vacated the pitch. But I think there is another final reason for the state that we are in. And that's because the Conservatives put political point scoring ahead of solving problems. Their divisive rhetoric about strivers versus scroungers, or claiming people just felt too bluesy to work, may have grabbed headlines, but it did absolutely nothing to actually get Britain working again. As today's report rightly concludes, people who are economically inactive are not one single group. There will be a few who may act fraudulently, others who say they can't work but who can. But the vast majority face a complex range of barriers which stop them from getting what both they and policymakers want, a pathway into paid employment. Now, I believe in personal responsibility. Under this government, there'll be obligations to engage with support, look for work, and to take jobs when they are offered, as there have been since the original Beveridge report was put into practice. But I am in politics to solve problems, not score cheap points or grab empty headlines that do nothing to tackle the real problems in people's lives. So, unlike the Conservatives, this new Labour government will be driven by the evidence and by the facts. As our new Prime Minister says, no more politics by performance, no more sticking plaster solutions, but a serious government with a serious plan for a decade of national renewal. This starts with a new focus and fundamental reform of the DWP. Put simply, under my political leadership, the DWP will shift from being a department for welfare to being a department for work. And to make this real, let me set out the actions and reforms I am setting in train. First, new goals. As Keir Starmer said during the election campaign, this Labour government has a bold, long-term ambition to get an 80% employment rate. Currently, that would mean over 2 million more people in work, growth boosted by tens of billions of pounds a year, and a multi-billion pound a year boost to the public finances too. We will pursue this ambition alongside our wider economic goals to raise productivity and living standards and to improve the quality of work as part of the government's growth mission. And our employment support system will change the outcomes we seek to achieve, and that's about higher engagement, higher employment and higher earnings too. Alongside these new goals, there will be fundamental reform in 3 connected parts. First, a major overhaul of our job centres. Only 1 in 5 people who are looking for work say they use a job centre. And as Alan said, only 1 in 6 employers who need staff use them to recruit. This actually drops to 1 in 10 for SMEs, which we know are the lifeblood of our economy. So this must change. We will create a new Jobs and Careers Service by bringing together Job Centre Plus and the National Careers Service, focusing on helping people not just to get into work, but to get on in their work, not only on monitoring and managing benefit claims. Our new service will mobilise the potential for new technologies and AI to better help people who are looking for work or wanting to develop their careers. And it will enhance and improve support for employers too, which your report says is critical. Second, we will establish a new youth guarantee to offer training, an apprenticeship or help to find work for all young people aged 18 to 21. And today, I can confirm that we will empower mayors and local areas to take the lead in driving down economic inactivity and driving up economic opportunity, taking inspiration from the brilliant report we are here to launch today. Devolving powers from central government is key to enabling areas to deliver ambitious new local growth plans. And as part of this, we will give local places the responsibility and resources to design a joined-up health, work and skills offer that's right for local people. Our aim is nothing less than a fundamental shift in the balance of power and resources to local areas, so that our mayors, councils, the NHS, businesses, colleges and the voluntary sector can work together to deliver real employment opportunities for local people. My department will support local areas to make a success of this new approach, starting by devolving new powers over employment support to catalyse action and change. Because the man, or even woman in Whitehall, will never know what's best for Barnsley, Blackpool or Birmingham. To deliver these changes and our manifesto commitments, we will be producing a white paper to get Britain working soon. This will support the other steps we are taking across government, creating more good jobs in clean energy and through our modern industrial strategy, making work pay and improving the quality of work through the New Deal for working people, cutting NHS waiting times, improving mental health support, particularly for young people, and transforming skills and childcare so we tackle the root causes of worklessness and fix the foundations for work, not simply paper over the cracks. And unlike the previous government, we are committed to working across Whitehall to tackle these complex problems, which is what our new mission-driven government is all about. Now, let us be honest. These new goals and reforms that I have set out will require the department I lead to make a very different contribution in the years ahead. Under my leadership, the DWP will continue to be a major provider of employment support through the National Jobs and Careers Service. But we will also need to be a driver of innovation, experimentation and learning to develop new solutions to complex problems and to build the evidence base, just as your pilot seeks to achieve. We'll need to be a capacity builder, working alongside local areas to create the conditions for success, including, and this is essential, sharing and unlocking data. And we will be a guardian and champion of quality, outcomes and user experience and value for money. This is a hugely challenging but exciting agenda for radical public service reform. And to help drive our work, I can today announce that I will be establishing a new Labour Market Advisory Board, a group of leading labour market experts to provide me and the department with insight, ideas and challenges as we deliver a fundamentally new approach. And I'm absolutely delighted that Professor Paul Gregg, former director of the Centre for Analysis of Social Policy at the University of Bath, has agreed to lead this new advisory board, and will be announcing further members shortly. I'm under no illusions about how big a change this will be. It can't happen overnight, but we can and we will roll up our sleeves and make a start. So if you're a young person with a mental health problem or lacking basic skills, we will help you reach your potential. If you are disabled and want to work, you'll get the respect and support you need. If you're a mum or caring for an elderly relative, we will be there with practical help so you can balance your work and family life. If you're an employer who needs to recruit or wants help to keep staff in work, we will support you, we will back you and help you find your next star employee. Together, this is what we will deliver to get Britain growing again, get Britain building again, and to get Britain working again. Thank you.
I said to you earlier, we've been waiting 14 years. Well, it's been well worth the wait, I can say. We've now got time for some questions from the floor, but we'll begin with the press and media. So our first question comes from Sophie Huskisson from the Daily Mirror.
Hi, Sophie from the Mirror. So today you heard a lot about climate
Well, we're not proposing a 4-day working week. We do want to see greater flexibility in the workplace. And anyone, I don't know if anyone's an employer here, lots of good employers know if they can be flexible for families, not just people looking after kids, but elderly parents, and sometimes both at the same time, or if you have fluctuating health problems. Actually, flexibility helps you retain those staff and skills. It helps you recruit staff and skills. That's better for them, and it's better for the bottom line. And, you know, Alan's report and the Barnsley report today proposes that everybody should have a requirement to engage with the system. That's not what we're proposing, but I'm very keen to learn from the Barnsley experience here to see what changes we can make. I think one of the most interesting things about this report, you know, because it actually spoke to people, it didn't label them, was that this 7 in 10 said they would like a job now or at some point in the future if they could find something that fitted with their lives and skills. I think that's a big opportunity for us in future, and that's something we want to work with local areas to develop. Thanks, Sophie.
Okay. Our second question is from Martina Bett from the Sun.
Thank you very much. You and Ms Milburn both mentioned that the problem with the previous government is that it has focused too much on a benefit sanctions regime instead of looking at wider issues like health and transport. I think Ms Milburn mentioned that there should be a better balance between sticks and carrots. But could you just confirm that under this government you will still impose tougher universal credit sanctions, which we see people being cut off support altogether if they do not comply with efforts to get into work?
I mean, the problem with what the Conservatives proposed was after 12 months to do this. We're not leaving people 12 months without genuine engagement and support. And there have always been conditions to look for work and consequences if you don't. That won't change. But I want to see a much greater focus on that upfront help and support. I think it's an entirely wrong framework to look at this out. People are crying out for help and support. As the report says, there are a few who will be acting fraudulently and others who say they can't work when they can. But the overwhelming majority want that help and support, and that's what we're determined to deliver. Thank you.
Okay. Our third question is Nick Guttridge from the Telegraph.
Hi there, thank you. In your speech, you said that too many people are economically active within labels and then claiming to the position they're in. Was that a direct repudiation of your predecessor's approach to essentially like that it was now too easy to be sort of signed off work with milder mental health conditions? And obviously the previous government had come up with plans to reform the fit note based on that argument. Are those plans now completely dead in the water? You're not going to go ahead first?
Was it a rebuke of the former government? Yes. And look, we need to. Alan made a very important point here, which is that whilst we talk about a lot, rightly so, about the people out of work, there are many people who are in work but are at risk of falling out. And there's a really, really big problem, which is that if you don't provide them with help and support early on, they're likely to stay out of work for a long time. I'm a bit long in the tooth now, referred to as a veteran MP recently, which I'm very proud of. But I remember when Jeremy Hunt proposed reform of fit notes when he was Health Secretary. You know, I'm not interested in repeating failed plans. I'm interested in new action. And our white paper is going to work and engage with employers about precisely these issues. How do you keep people having that link to work? Our reforms, I think, to statutory sick pay as part of the New Deal for working people will be important there. How do we ensure we have a decent system of occupational health in this country? And how, crucially, do you act quickly? Because you need to keep those connections to the world of work.
Okay, thanks, Liz. We'll go on to Alex Taylor from Globe.
We will take other questions from the audience as well. I'm sorry, but this is, you know, hi, Alex.
You mentioned about a sort of reform of the job centre. How much work will go into that, and is there a sort of time frame of when that would be in place or what it would be that you wanted to look at?
I want to make really clear here that I think we have some amazing work coaches in our job centres who bust a gut to try and help, but they're sort of constrained by this top-down system, and many of them really understand that these sort of weekly, fortnightly mandatory assessments is the only kind of approach that doesn't give people the time or the links that they need, isn't really working. And if you go to see the other parts of the country and what they're doing, if you listen to Andy Burnham in Manchester, he just says people are referred to our work projects by the job centre because they don't have the time to do that. So what are they focusing on? It's a big set of changes. It won't happen overnight, but we're getting going straight away. And our white paper, which we'll be publishing as soon as possible, will set more details on that. But if there are any work coaches watching or listening, they've got loads of ideas, experience. I want to use that to really reshape the future of job centres because I know that's what they want to do. Thanks, Alex.
Okay, Peter Lane from Channel 5. No, Peter not with us? Okay, we'll move on to Tom McDougall from the BBC.
Hi, Tom.
So do you agree that it's time to replace sanctions in the welfare system with better targeted support to help people back into work? And I promise one when you say scrapping the two-child cap is the single most cost-effective way of alleviating child poverty.
Well, as I said in a previous answer, there will be conditions in the system and consequences if they're not met, just as there always have been. It's really interesting reading the original Beveridge report where that is made clear right from the start. But I think we have had too much of a focus on that rather than on the help and support people really need to get into work. And on the issue of the two-child limit, I think this is one of my absolute personal priorities, is tackling child poverty. I ran the Maternity Alliance charity before I became an MP. I know the impact that poverty has in the earliest years of life. We have set out immediate action. The Prime Minister has launched a big new cross-government task force on this to deliver a new child poverty unit in the Cabinet Office. We are faced with a dire economic inheritance from the last government. We will only make commitments when we say how we can afford them. But let me point you to the last Labour government, which lifted over 500,000 children out of poverty, compared to the last Conservative government that plunged 700,000 more children into poverty. I know which side I stand on. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, Liz has agreed to take 2 or 3 questions from the floor from elsewhere. So, would someone like to raise their hands? Yeah.
Thank you. Nick is from the University of Sheffield.
Oh, great.
One of the big issues that you've kind of touched upon is the issue of worklessness and people getting back into work. I also wonder whether you might want to reflect or talk a little bit about your thoughts on specific policy tools that regional and local authorities can make to create those better paid, more stable jobs, but also to upskill people that are already in the labour market as well.
Should we take a couple so that we can get as many in as we can? Is that all
Any
right?
more raised hands from anyone? John?
Thank you. One of the drawbacks for employment, particularly in the care sector, is zero contract hours.
Yeah.
Have you got any thoughts about reforming that? They're like on a merry-go-round, changing from one company to another because they can't get a set amount of hours. Have you got any thoughts?
Okay, there's a lady here.
Yeah, Helen Stace from Work Comission.
Oh, hello.
So the increasing mental health which has been highlighted is one of the symptoms in July, and I'm just interested in how far back you were going to actually look at the root cause.
Yeah.
That itself is not a root cause, it's a symptom.
Yeah. 3 really good questions. Whether it's on our local growth plans that we've talked about, which will be a big change, to what I've said today about those being underpinned by local work, health and skills plans, joining up all the myriad pots of money and different organisations who are involved all into one place. I see this really clearly in my own city. We want to put local mayors and combined authorities and local council leaders in the driving seat of change there. It's really interesting hearing this discussion about the issues in Barnsley. In Leicester, actually the main reason driving inactivity, economic inactivity in my city is having responsibility for caring for a family member. That may be many older generations, living in multi-generational, because we have a very diverse community, lots of multi-generational homes, but also my job centre tells me we have lots of real issues around lack of childcare, particularly for single parents who desperately need it. So that's why what I really mean is, I know what Leicester needs. I don't know, I mean, I do now because I've read the report, but you can't possibly run it for the centre. So what we see is those local growth plans underpinned by bringing together the work, health and skills plans is the only way that we're going to drive change. On 0 hours contracts in social care, before I was lucky enough to get this job, I've spent sort of 20 years of my life working on health and social care and was the shadow social care minister. So it's a huge, huge problem. And we've said as part of the New Deal for working people that we will ban exploitative 0 hours contracts. We also really want to have a fair pay agreement for social care staff so that we can really start shifting it. And you know what? The NHS knows that actually they need a decent social care workforce. We've got to stop seeing the two systems separately. You've got hospitals full of elderly people who don't need to be there, but you've not got the social care staff that we want and need. We've got to start working together. And on mental health, you rightly say the links between mental health and social and economic factors are really important. I think this is a really important and complex issue. There is less stigma around talking about mental health, but we're also actually seeing higher diagnosis rates too. And I do think the pandemic had a real impact on the mental health of younger people. So we need to, I think the real focus for us has got to be to get the support early on. We know half of all serious mental health problems start when people are very, very young. So we need to get the mental health support into schools, into local communities. We've got big plans around that, recruiting 8,500 more mental health staff and new open access hubs in every community. But we know only too well the links between poverty, deprivation and mental health too, which is why Wes Streeting, our new health secretary, he's a huge supporter of the agenda we're talking about. He knows that as well as cutting waiting times, shifting the focus of services towards prevention, he wants to look at the role the NHS and social care will have in boosting social and economic outcomes locally. Let me just finish by saying this. Before the election, I visited South London and the Maudsley Mental Health Trust, one of the biggest mental health trusts in the country, currently chaired by Norman Lamb, who's a former Liberal Democrat minister. He is fundamentally reshaping the care in the hospital because the evidence that good work is good for mental health, that it reduces the number of relapses people have, it reduces their length of stay in hospital, that skills, employment, training, opportunities is actually treatment. It's actually helping people have better mental health. I think there's lots more we can do on this agenda, and I certainly intend to be working with Wes Streeting to deliver. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay. That brings us to the end of the formal part of today, but I just want to say, first of all, a huge thanks to Alan and all the commissioners for what is a fantastic report, which will not only help change the lives of people in Barnsley, but I hope in due course across the country, and they deserve enormous thanks and credit for bringing their skills, knowledge, understanding to the table on that, and without them we simply couldn't have done it. I'd like to thank our staff team